Hey guys and girls, welcome back to another beautiful video on this beautiful channel on this beautiful day. How you guys and girls doing? Hope you're doing great as always. Today's video is going to be nice. We're going to switch up, fix the level a little bit. We're going to add some more movement stuff. We're going to add jumping as well. We're going to work with a physics material, and we're going to talk about a few ways you can implement movement. But to get started, I want to fix the map up a little bit. Now, we don't have a lot of colliders on our map, but I added a bunch of tiles. So if you just click on your sample map here and you open up tiles, you'll see that there's a bunch here. But if we click on the sample level, there's just one collider set here. Now, there's a few things that you can do. You can add more colliders here. If I add another collider, box collider 2D, it will pop up. And then I can edit that by clicking the original button here or a button on the left here. So this will count as basically one collider, but it's split up into two pieces. So I can just put it here, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to add that for the other platform. What I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this collider completely. I'm going to remove the original one as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of the tiles and I'm going to add a box collider to each of these. And you're going to be like, what? There's a bunch of colliders. What are you doing? You crazy, mate? But that's not a problem because we're going to click in a button called Used by Composite. And if you remember, I talked about composite colliders before, and what they do is they collect all of the colliders they have in their child objects and they kind of build it into one to make it more efficient and optimized. So I'm going to put in click Used by Composite. And then I'm going to go ahead to my tiles here and I'm going to add a Composite Collider. And once you add the Composite Collider, you'll see that all the colliders popped up on all of this. So it kind of automatically saw all of the colliders that existed and it put them all into one. Now you can still add offsets and you can do anything you want with this, which you could do with the other colliders, the specific ones. I could use his trigger, which we'll talk about later, and I can do all the offset stuff I want. But this looks really, really good. Now, if I play this, everything will fall down. Now, why did that happen? Well, because if you noticed, once we added the Composite Collider, it added a rigid body as well. So what we want to do is we want to freeze this rigid body. We want to change the body type to static. And once you do that, this will just be a static collider, a static object basically, which doesn't really move. And if you want, you can click in the static and click yes, add to children. So once you click add to children, all of these will be static as well. And this just tells Unity that this is a static object which shouldn't move and is just chilling right here, and it optimizes it for you. Once you do that and we click this again, we will not have a problem. And there you go. Our player collided. Everything feels great. Another small annoyance I have is we click our player and we click on the capsule collider, we'll see that we have a bunch of uneven numbers, and this I don't really like. So what I want to do is I want to put everything to 0 again, and then you'll see that, or we'll put the size to 1. Sorry about that. So we'll put the size to 1. It'll just be a little circle. We'll try to put it right at the feet, and we'll try to find an even number here. We'll zoom in a little bit, and we'll try to find the perfect position. So it should be 1.5 and 0.25. And if we zoom in and we actually move our player down to where it's dark, we can work with this a little easier. It looks like the collider is perfect. But obviously we need to edit the collider so that it looks nice again. So click the edit button again and just drag it into the body like it should be. Drag this down to the head and drag this into the body again. Now we have a nice collider. Let's move the player back up to where he was. There you go. If we run this now, I feel that the feet will collide with the ground a lot better. Now let's add some jumping. Now any platformer needs some good jumping. We're going to start off by opening the movement controller script. And if we look at our script, what we have is just basic movement. What we need to add now is a variable that will allow us to control some kind of force that we can jump with. The whole idea here is to add or set the velocity in the Y direction so that it faces upwards and it just pushes the player up from the ground and jumps a little bit. And then Unity's gravity and everything will take care of the falling. So to start off, I'll add a serialized field again so that I can add a private float jump force. And I'll set the default value to 12F. And if we go down to update, we're going to do the jumping right here. And it's a very simple if statement. If we get the input dot get button down, which means that if that button is pressed down, so as soon as the button is pressed, this will happen. But then it will stop triggering for that. If you hold down the button, it won't continue to trigger this if statement. There are different ones. You can get button, if you just click or just type get button and you look at what exists, you'll see get button down, which is when it's pressed, get button up, which is when it's released. And the same goes for the mouse buttons. But we'll use get button down. And what button do we want to get? Well, there is a button called jump in the Unity Input Manager. So let's just go and find that. If we open Unity here and let's go to our edit and preferences or project settings, and you'll click on the Input Manager, go to the list here and you'll find jump. And your jump is bound to the space button. And you can change that. You can add an alternative button to the positive here, so that once you jump, you'll add a positive value. And then you have your gravity and how fast that happens. So it's pretty instantaneous. Going back to the script now, the code for this is very simple. We want to manipulate the rigid body, just like we do when we're moving the character. So I'm going to say player rigid body 2D dot velocity equals new vector 2, just like we did before. Now vector 2 here, if I didn't explain that before, is a class that holds two float variables or two float values. So it's x and a y, and that's a 2D coordinate system, right? So we'll give it the x value, which will stay the same. So player rigid body 2D dot velocity dot x, just like we did with the moving where y stayed the same. But here we want to manipulate the y direction. So we want to set the y velocity to our jump force. And once that's done, our player should be able to jump. I'll just clean this up a little bit so it's a little more readable, or at least I find it a little more readable. Let's try running this. And then, whoa, we can jump. And that is crazy high. And to fix that jump that was crazy high, I'll set the gravity scale to 4, which just increases the gravity generally for this rigid body. So if I run this again, and I'll jump, now our player won't jump like crazy. It's just a natural, nice jump. Now, the biggest problem we have is that we can just continuously jump, and that's because we're not checking when the player touches the ground so that we can reset the jump. And later on, we're going to want to be able to jump several times depending on an upgrade or something you find in the world where you're allowed to do a double jump or a triple jump. And we'll add that functionality in just a second here. So to do that, let's start off by just dragging our player up here so we can see that, and we can minimize the sample level. I'm going to add an empty game object to the player, and I'm going to call that bottom collision point. And what you'll see is that it will just pop up here at 0, 0 relative to the player. And what I want to do is I just want to drag that down to the feet. Now I can't really see the player properly because of the camera symbol, but I'll put him right here. And we'll see that that point is right at the pixel of the feet. So that's perfect. That's really just where we want that point. And you'll see here in the transform that it's at -1. Beautiful. So we want to be able to access that here in our code. I'm going to do a serialize field, and I'm just going to name that the same thing, transform private bottom collision point. And I'll set that to null. Now you can set these objects here, the class objects, to null so that they don't have a reference. And then we can check in the code if this is null from the beginning and it wasn't found, then we won't do anything with this. So it won't crash if we don't set this, and it will be optional for us. In our case, maybe it really shouldn't be optional, but it's a good chance for us to see how we can work around crashes like this if we don't really always want this, and we don't want the game to crash if this isn't there. So let's drag that to the player. I'll drag the player up again, and we should see it show up here. If we save the script as well, don't forget to save the script. It will reload. Good. And now it showed up here, bottom collision point. Now there are two things that I want to do. First of all, I do want to drag the rigid body here, and I do then want to drag the bottom collision point all the way to this variable here. Once that's done, we have access to that. We'll go back to the script and we can use this variable. Now, before we start with all the collision stuff and checking, I want to add a few layers. Now, layers help us organize and check what can collide with what. And I just want to go ahead and show you where you can set that. Now, if you click on layer here while selecting an object, you can add layers, and you'll add a bunch of layers. There are already a few here, but we'll add a few more. So I'll add something called player, and I'll add something called tiles. Now, once you have these two, we can assign different game objects to these layers, which will allow Unity to kind of select what it wants to collide with what. Well, will let us change what we want to interact with what. And to find this, what we need to do is go down to Project Settings, Physics 2D, and just go to Layer Collision Matrix. And anytime you add a layer, you'll find them here. And this is where you can select what should collide with what. So if I don't want player objects to collide with themselves, I can uncheck that. If I don't want tiles to collide with players, which would be kind of dumb, I can check that, and so on and so on. So this allows us to control a little bit how the collision system and how the physics system interacts with different layers. So once we added these two, we'll go back to our player and our sample level. So I'll increase that. I'll click on tiles here and go to layers and add all of these to tiles. And I'll say yes, change the children. So that means that each of these child objects will have the layered tiles. Unity makes that simple for us, which is nice. And then we'll go to player and we'll add these things to player so that when we're working with the collision and we're checking the collision detection, this point we only want it to check for tiles. We don't want it to collide with itself. That's why we're in different layers here. And we'll see that in the code in just a minute. So if we go back to the code, then we're going to add a new private bool called isGround, and we'll set it to true just as a default value. So it will just tell us that our player is on the ground from start, but this will be changed as the update is called because we're going to do something which will change this continuously. Then we need something called a layer mask. I'll do a serialized field, private layer mask. I'll call it tile layer. And this will allow us to filter out what layer we want to use or which we want to check for collisions. Now we're going to get to some nice coding. So now, like I said, we're going to do isGround equals, and we'll check this. We'll switch this bool from true to false whenever we're actually touching the ground. Now, how do we check how to or where this point, the bottom point at our feet, which we just created, the bottom collision point, how do we check if that is colliding with something at the feet? Well, we'll make a little circle at the bottom, which will check for collisions or check for tiles below the feet. So this is very simple. We'll just write physics 2D overlap circle. So this will create a circle which overlaps at the point, it overlaps different game objects just to check whatever is there. And the first thing we want to give it here is we want to give it the bottom collision point dot position. So with the position, it should create, or the center position where it should create the circle, and then the radius of the circle. So we'll do 0.2f for the radius, and this is right below the feet, how big it should be. And then the last one is what layer we want it to check. So this is where the tile layer comes in. Once we have this, we'll create a little overlapping circle, which we won't see, but the physics engine sees, and it checks for whatever this circle collides with when it's created at this position with this size and in this layer. And how do we implement the limit of jumping? So firstly, I'll do and here, and then isGround equals true. So we can only jump when isGround is true, and we're clicking the jump button, and we'll set isGround equals false here once we actually jump, or just to set it so that we can't jump again until the player touches the ground the next time. Let's set the tile layer to whatever we want it to collide with. So once I run it now, it should check in the correct layer, and now I can't jump more than once. So it's limited to one jump right now. And we'll add the functionality for multiple jumps in a little bit, but for now, this is working really nice. Now we do have a little issue still, which is quite interesting. And that is when I jump against a wall and I keep moving to the right, it will kind of stick to the wall. And we don't have really nice, it doesn't feel that good. And that's because the collider is sticking to the material of the tile or the collider. And that is a physics material, which we can change. So what we'll do is we'll create a new folder here in our projects tab, and we'll name the folder materials. We'll click this and we'll create a new 2D physics material 2D, and we'll call it no friction. And we'll do just what the name says. We'll remove the friction value from this, which is at 0.4. We'll set it to 0. And once that's done, we can add that to our player collider, which takes a physics material, and it will allow the player to be really slippy against the ground or whatever collider it's colliding with. So now when I jump up, it will just slide up here and it won't be an issue. It can slide up there as well. Feels really good. So hopefully you liked this video. It was quite simple. We just did some movement and some jumping and some tile map fixes. But in the next video, we're going to add multiple jumping. We're going to clean up some stuff with the variables. We're going to have a little simple camera movement with the player. And we're going to be playing around with flipping the sprite. So there's a few things we're going to work on in the next one. It's going to be really fun. Thank you for watching this one. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.